Hello, good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to be here again. So it's Monday, the 23rd of March. I now have my children at home, like many of you will do as well, which makes it seem even more important to keep doing this. I worked out the other day that I was answering a question for the local newspaper about this, and they asked if I was going to read all the books. And I said to them, well, if I read them all, that'll go through till September, because I worked out there are either 16 or 17 chapters in most of them. There is 18, I think there are 18 chapters in the last book. So if I did Monday to Friday every day, I think even if I don't have a break, if we don't stop for Easter, we don't stop for the May half term, we don't stop for the summer holidays, it still takes till September. But maybe some of you would actually feel like that. And to be honest, I realised the other day, thinking about this, that I started out thinking I would do this for parents and kids, and then I realised on Saturday when I was thinking about it, actually I'm doing this for me as much as for you, because with this bat flu thing, I needed to do something useful, or at least that might be useful to somebody else, something positive. So yeah, anyway, without further ado, we are on to chapter 4 of The Leopard in the Golden Cage. So what happened at the end of chapter 3? Oh, Joe tried to get back and didn't manage. He didn't know how to. He ended up going to the loo. You remember that bit? Nice. And yeah, now he's been made, a bed's been made up for him by Arethusa in the linen cupboard. He's been given the toothpaste, remember that one too? And now he's gone to sleep in the linen cupboard. Okay. Chapter 4. He was woken the next morning by a quiet tap on the door. "Only me, Master Joe," Arethusa murmured. "I've brought you some breakfast. I thought Miss Lucilia's family might not be expecting you." Joe sat up and rubbed his eyes, wondering for a moment where on earth he was. "Thank you very much," he said dazedly. "What's the time?" "5:30. "Oh," he yawned. "Is everyone else getting up?" "Of course, it's past sunrise." Arethusa shook her head at him and gave him the tray. On it were a metal cup filled with water and a large metal plate of bread and fruit. Joe shifted to get comfortable. The lumps in the mattress he'd noticed last night had clumped together, leaving some bits completely empty, and it felt itchy through the cover. It was amazing that he'd slept so deeply. He frowned. "What's the matter, Master Joe?" Arethusa was instantly anxious. "Nothing. I think I'm half sitting on the floor, that's all." "I can shake the mattress for you if you stand up." "No, don't worry." "What's in it, though? It smells funny." Arethusa looked at him. "The same as always." "But what's that?" "Wool, straw and feathers." She shook her head again and went out. Joe wondered what she thought of him. He put the tray down and folded the mattress over on itself, then sat down again and rested the plate on his knees. The bread was heavy and dark. He chewed his way dutifully through about half of it, then gave up and started on the fruit. There were apricots and plums, raspberries and figs, and pieces of melon and strawberries too, all of it ripe and delicious. By the time he'd eaten as much as he could, the idea of staying here a while longer didn't seem nearly as bad as it had done last night. He took off his nightshirt and put on the tunic and belt he'd worn yesterday. At some point, he supposed, he would need clean clothes, but he didn't need to worry about that just yet. At home, he would usually have a wash and clean his teeth too, but he didn't fancy the toothpaste, and there was no one to make him do it. He gave a quiet whoop in his linen closet. What freedom! He had put the mattress flat once more and was wondering what to do about meeting Lucy when there was another tap at the door. "Excuse me disturbing you again, Master Joe. Miss Lucilia says you're to meet her in the informal gardens by the tree where you sat yesterday. She said you'd know which one." "Thank you, Arethusa, and thank you for the breakfast." Joe beamed at her. Her eyes fell on the bread and the last of the fruit. "Would you like that?" he asked. "There was too much for me. I couldn't finish it. Sorry, that's the only reason I didn't finish it." Arethusa blushed. "I wouldn't want you to think—" "Please eat it. Nobody will know." She smiled shyly. "Thank you, Master Joe." Lucy was waiting for him when he got to the tree she had suggested. "What took you so long? I was starting to worry." "I came the long way round. I didn't want to bump into anyone." Like him, she was wearing the same clothes as yesterday, but her hair was wound up and pinned with combs decorated with pearly white shell. She was very pretty, he thought. He'd been too taken up with everything else yesterday to notice. "Shall we go down to the seashore then?" she said. "I've got lessons this morning, but there's still time." Together they walked down the sloping lawns in the early morning sunshine. "What are you learning about?" Joe asked. "Nothing very interesting. My sisters and I do reading and writing exercises and some arithmetic, and today we're doing weaving." "That sounds like fun." She wrinkled her nose. "Not really. You do the same thing over and over, so you soon get bored." "What are you making?" "Nothing yet. Antonia and I are still just practicing. Later on we'll make drapes, I suppose, like Salustia, or material for clothes, maybe, if we get good. Salustia's not bad. She's working really hard at it, but that's because she has to, if she's going to be ready in time." "In time for what?" "Getting married." Joe frowned. "How old did you say she was?" 13. "So when's she going to be married?" "Any time. It hasn't been arranged yet, but it won't be long." He stopped walking and stared at her. "That's awful." Lucy laughed. "No, it's not. It's normal. She could have got married last year. She's old enough." "Does she want to?" "I don't know." She looked at him curiously. "That's just how things are. We don't really talk about it." They reached the water. There was no beach, just a broad shingle edge creeping out beneath the grass. "What about boys?" Joe asked. "Do they get married that young?" "I think they can get married at 14, but they're usually a bit older. Marius is 16 and Tiberius is 15, but I don't think there are plans for either of them at the moment." She picked up a stone and skimmed it across the surface of the water. "Who are Marius and Tiberius? I thought you only had sisters." "Marius is my eldest brother, and Tiberius is adopted." "Why did your parents adopt when they had your brother already?" "They had 5 of us when they adopted Tiberius. He's my father's nephew. He came to live with us after my father died and my mother remarried." "Bah, I misread that completely. He came to live with us after his father died and his mother remarried." "Hang on, let me get this straight. There's Marius, then Tiberius, then Salustia, then you, then Antonia. And Petrus, he's 12, so he's between me and Salustia. There was Flavius as well, but he died." "When was that?" Lucy picked up another stone. It bounced 6 times on the water. 2 years ago, before we came here. He was the littlest, only 4. "That's really sad," Joe said. Lucy shrugged. "Didn't you mind?" "Of course I did. I loved him. He used to come everywhere with me. They said he was my doll. That's why they gave his bulla to me, not to Salustia." She tugged at the pendant around her neck. "Not that it worked. It's meant to keep away evil spirits, but they still got him." She picked up a rock and hurled it into the water. "I suppose it's just what happens sometimes." Joe didn't know what to say. He picked up a stone and skimmed it over the sea. "That was a good one," Lucy said. Joe tried to think of a way of changing the subject. He didn't want to think about Lucy's little brother dying, and it seemed like she didn't want to think about it either, but he didn't want to seem uncaring. "What's that over there?" He pointed to a dark smudge on the horizon. Lucy looked up. It's a ship! She clapped her hands. How exciting! I love it when a ship comes in. Will it land here? No, there's a quay further along. Joe looked where she indicated. Shall we go down there to meet it? He suggested. No point yet. It'll be another couple of hours before it's in. We'll go after my lessons. What's on it? Who knows? Could be food, or cloth, or building materials, or even animals. That's what I love. It's always a surprise. She looked up at the sun. I should probably go. I'll be in trouble if I'm late. Shall we meet down here later? Okay, all right. He grinned. I'll never speak good Latin. It's fine, I like it. So, what time then? Just after 10 o'clock? My lessons are from 7 till 10 at this time of year. And how will I know when it's 10 o'clock? She smiled. The sun will be about there. She pointed at the sky. Right. Joe frowned. Let's hope I can remember that. He watched her hurry away up the long lawn to the palace and wondered what it would be like to stay here always. Quite suddenly, he felt a rush of homesickness so strong he thought he might actually throw up. He sat down on the grass and put his head on his knees. It wouldn't happen. It couldn't happen. Because if he was here forever, he would have to become part of all this. He shivered. There seemed to be a lot of things that were either uncomfortable or downright horrible, even when you were rich like Lucy's family. He couldn't bear to think about it. When the sickness had gone, he got up and began to walk along the shore towards the quay, trying to decide how to pass the time until Lucy came back. Perhaps he should go up to the other side of the palace and see where the slaves lived, he thought. That would be the flip side to Lucy's life. He felt a spark of curiosity. She was so offhand about them, but he was willing to bet that she knew next to nothing about how they lived. The more he thought about it, the more it seemed like a good way of spending the time. It would be the kind of thing they would do on a school trip, and he felt comforted by the idea. It made being here seem more normal. In any case, Lucy probably wouldn't be allowed to visit the slave quarters, and she certainly wouldn't be able to slip through unseen. That was one aspect of her life that wasn't so different from his own. There were lots of things she wasn't allowed to do, and places she wasn't allowed to go. Grown-ups always said that children had had more freedom in the past, but maybe that wasn't strictly true. He kept to the edge of the gardens, hurrying from one shrub to the next, just in case anyone was looking out from the south wing. If he got caught by Lucy's mother, it could be a disaster. For all he knew, she might already have remarked to her sister-in-law about adopting a mute boy. Certainly, as soon as she did, the game would be up. He refused to let himself imagine what punishment might follow. When he reached the palace buildings, he stopped at the end of the south wing. The colonnades were busy now, where yesterday they had been mostly deserted. A few feet away, a man squatted carving a large piece of wood. Further along, 2 men were hoisting the trunk of a tree onto a sawhorse, and beyond that some women sat and sewed. Around all 4 colonnades, individuals and small groups of people were busy with different activities. Others scurried from one part of the palace to another, carrying all manner of things, an armful of what looked like scrolls, a pair of leather buckets, various sorts of gardening tools, piles of linen, pots and dishes, baskets of fruit and wool. Joe watched, fascinated. Nobody went into the formal gardens except for a gardener who moved along the paths, clipping the short, thick hedges. It was so much like watching a film that he forgot that he was a visible part of the scene, so he jumped, startled, to find someone close beside him. "Never seen people working before?" The boy who'd spoken was a few years older than him and quite a bit taller. "Yes, but not like this," Joe said truthfully. "Oh dear," the boy drawled. "Another one awed by the glories of Fishbourne. It's very boring how impressed everyone is when they come here." Joe looked up at him. He had curly black hair and broad shoulders. He should have been handsome, but his mouth was turned down at the corners, giving him a sour expression. "Whose son are you?" the boy asked. Too late, Joe remembered that he wasn't supposed to be able to speak. This was exactly the situation he'd hoped to avoid. He tried desperately to remember who Lucy had said he should pretend to be. "What's the matter with you?" The boy narrowed his eyes. "Cat got your tongue?" "Claudius Maximus Antonius," Joe babbled, stringing together the only Latin-sounding names he could think of. "Claudius Maximus Antonius?" The boy laughed nastily. "Do you want to try again?" Joe shook his head dumbly. "Because all our visitors are family, and those names don't belong to any of us. In fact, what you've just come out with isn't a normal name at all." Joe looked at his feet and said nothing. "Claudius always comes second, you see. It's a nomen, not a praenomen." The boy took a step closer to Joe. "There's something funny about you, isn't there? I thought so from the way you were watching everyone. Who are you really?" "I'm nobody," Joe muttered to the ground. The boy cuffed him on the shoulder. "It's polite to look at someone when they speak to you." Still, Joe couldn't bring himself to raise his eyes above the boy's knees. He felt a hand catch him roughly under the chin, forcing his head up. "There, that's better, don't you think? Now I'm going to ask you again. Who are you?" The boy bared his teeth. Joe made himself look into the boy's eyes. They glittered. Joe blinked. The expression in them was as close to evil as he had ever seen. He looked away. "Well?" snapped the boy. Joe opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. He winced, sure that the boy was going to hit him. He didn't dare look. All at once, his surroundings dwindled away. The air hissed. He swayed and blinked. The boy had vanished. The palace had vanished too, and with it all the people. Joe stood on the dolphin mosaic, wearing his own clothes, in his own time. He scrambled up through the rail onto the walkway and looked around. There was nobody nearby. He closed his eyes and opened them again. He was definitely back in the present. Outside the windows of the museum, it was broad daylight and cloudy, just as it had been on the day he came here. He looked at his watch. 1 o'clock. Was it possible that no time had passed here at all? His heart leapt. He dashed back through the museum and out to the picnic area. There, at the bench, were his mum and Kate, with Sam and Ben. "Are you all right, Joe?" His mum sounded concerned. "What's the big hurry? You didn't think we'd go without you, did you?" Joe shook his head and tried to catch his breath. "Nothing. It's fine. I'm okay." He smiled at her. "I'm glad you've cheered up anyway. Did someone find your St. Christopher for you?" "What?" He looked at her blankly. "Oh, no sign of it." He hoped she wouldn't notice his confusion. His mum looked at Kate. Sometimes these kids are a mystery, aren't they? Kate smiled. "Come and sit down again, Joe. Did you want your apple?" Joe sank his teeth into it, grateful for something to anchor him in his own time again. It tasted real and normal, just like an apple always tasted. He ate it in silence while everyone else talked on around him. But at the back of his mind, he couldn't help wondering what an apple would taste like in Lucy's time. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 4. He's back in his own world, in our world, Joe. But the past has got him now. He's going to want to go back. Already, no sooner is he home than he's thinking about what food might taste like in Lucy's world. In the meantime, he has met Tiberius. Now, Tiberius will be on his heels for the whole of the series, in one form or another. A true baddie. Not that Joe realises that yet, although of course he has a bit of a sense of it from what Tiberius is like. You might have noticed that I misread all sorts of little bits. If any of you are reading along with a copy of the book in your hand, I was reading some Paddington to my littlest son this morning, and every time I missed a word or replaced a word with another word, without quite realising, he'd pick me up on it. He's nearly 6 and he's reading over my shoulder and pointing out the mistakes. So I'm quite glad that I haven't got any of you sitting here in my study pointing out my mistakes, because there are plenty. This is why I'm not recording it for Audible. This is why it's just a sort of like a end of school or bedtime story or whatever. Anyway, that's it for today's instalment. I'll be back again same time tomorrow, 2:30 for chapter 5. So I hope you've had a good first day of homeschooling, those of you who've been at home. I've had a slightly weird day. I have 3 children. One of them has spent the whole day so far down at our local hospital with my husband, because he put a machete into his hand last night and has been waiting all day to have it stitched up. So he was down at A&E yesterday night for a couple of hours. They x-rayed it. They said, well, yeah, it's okay, but we think we need to stitch it up. And yeah, so that's what one of my homeschool pupils is doing. So, homeschool, day 1, lesson 1, year 6 maths. You need 20 lengths of willow to make the wall of your den, and each one has to be 50 centimetres long. The question is, how many stitches do you need in your hand when the machete slips? Oh dear. Anyway, hopefully he's all right. I'm kind of assuming he's probably actually being operated on now, because he was still waiting at 1:30. So anyway, I shall probably go and ring my husband in a minute and find out. So I hope you've had a more successful day than my son has had. Anyway, right, that's it. I'll see you tomorrow.